Good evening, everybody. The Shloshim is the 30th day following the burial of Yid. The Shloshim is the 30th day following the burial of Yid. Traditionally, family and friends come together to learn Torah, do mitzvahs, in honor of the neshamas. These actions allow the neshamas to elevate in Shemayim. But why 30 days? This represents the 30-day full cycle of the moon. Just as the moon waxes and wanes in a cycle, so too the 30-day period of the morning is an opportunity to emotionally come full circle. The mourning process begins with a funeral and the first days of the Shiva. Not even a glimmer of light and hope exists. As time goes on, the light slowly comes back, fuller and fuller, like the moon. The 30 days is an important central cycle of time, a time to renew and a time to come to grips with a new reality. Thank you for joining my nephews, Zalman and Nussin and myself, to mark the Shloshim of their dear parents and my brother. The order of the events will be as follows. I will say a few words, followed by Zalman, who is 38, the fourth child of Tzvi and Itty, who will start with a speech, and then conclude with a siyum, following by Kaddish, which I will ask everyone to stand up for. Zalman's eldest son, Mati, who is 11, will make a speech and a siyum on Pirkei Avos. Nussin's eldest son, Mani, who is 12, will also make a speech. My nephew Nussin, who is 36, and the fifth child of Tzvi and Itty, will also make a speech and a siyum followed by Kaddish, which again we ask everybody to stand up for. We will then conclude the evening by starting a Sefer Torah in their parents' honor, and we will invite people to come and write a letter, and to let you all know that there will be Ma'ariv afterwards. Yep. Okay. I'm going to share a few words on behalf of Tzvi's siblings. As you know, we all lived in Sydney. Tzvi and I went to Moriah College. Around 1966 to 67, Moriah changed their policy, and yarmulkes were no longer compulsory in school. It was at this stage that my parents realized that Tzvi needed to change schools. I think it was Rabbi Groner who convinced them that Tzvi should come to Melbourne, which he did in 1967 when he was 14. He did not have any family in Melbourne. Melbourne at that stage was a very established and very warm community, and very quickly Tzvi was made to feel at home. On Tzvi's behalf, I want to thank several families who really made the difference. They had a huge impact on all of us, and we all learned so much from them. From Mr. and Mrs. Binyamin Althaus, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Groner, Reb Nochem Zalman and Mrs. Gorovich, Herschel and Ida Klein, and Reb Zalman Sarabransky and families. We are very grateful to these families who welcomed myself when I came to Olchana, my sisters Devorah Moss and Shoshana Dietz when they came to go to Beth Rivka and Olchana. These relationships have continued for the next 2 generations and still continue today. Tzvi did very well in Melbourne, Yeshiva College and then YG. While there, he went on a summer Merkos Shlichus to New Zealand, where they had never seen rabbinical students before, and it was written up in the local newspaper. After YG, he learnt in 770. In early 1975, Tzvi won the Goyrel to America, where he met and married Itty on Gimel Tammuz. Tzvi and Itty have a very beautiful family. All their children learnt in Chabad Moistas and gave the Rebbe much nachas. I was very happy when they came to live in Melbourne for 10 years, and we became even closer. Tzvi loved veal schnitzels, so nearly every Friday afternoon I would visit Tzvi with the schnitzels. I would often find Tzvi and Nussin in the garage man cave, enjoying their pre-Shabbos shmuz with their cigars. Whenever Tzvi would travel, he would always check what I needed brought back from New York or wherever he was going, even if it was a pair of very large boots, which he always delivered. Tzvi and Itty were so proud of their children, Minty and Rocky in South Africa, Dovi and Sheva, Shmuley and Eliza, Hannah and Izzy in Miami, Levi and Toby in New York, and Zalman and Tali, Nussin and Sarah in Melbourne. At least they were zoche to see them all so happily married with their own beautiful children and all involved in helping in their own communities. Tzvi and Itty will continue to shep nachas, while we all continue to pray for the coming of Mashiach so that we can all be reunited with them very soon.
All right, here goes. My 6 siblings and I have been through an unbearable 6 weeks from the moment that we found out that our parents' building collapsed, which I still can't comprehend, the miracle of Nusrat and I getting an exemption and then tickets to leave Australia, the 40 hours we spent flying without even knowing if our parents were alive, the agonizing wait for 12 days and the senseless hope to only find out that both our parents are gone. Burying both our parents together side by side, then sitting Shiva together for them, the 14 days of hotel quarantine are just some highlights of what's transpired over the last 6 weeks for us. They say the human mind protects itself from trauma by disconnecting itself from its conscious to its subconscious. This is what they call a state of shock. It has been 6 weeks, and while I can explain to you what's happened and seem like I fully understand everything I'm saying, I am so far from comprehending that my parents are gone. And one day when all this sinks in, the brutal reality will hit me in ways that I cannot even bear to imagine. During Shiva, and now at the Shloshim, everyone is telling us how wonderful both our parents were, and the endless stories are very comforting to us children. This is how us Jews are trained to mourn and remember the loved ones. My father was a man with unshakable loyalty, a chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and someone who devoted his entire life to his wife, who he was desperately in love with. A man whose only care, worry, and joy was his children and grandchildren, and someone who worked hard on himself constantly, and behind his emotional mask was a soft man who loved people, just had a hard time telling them. My mother had an open heart for everyone she encountered. She was annoying about not speaking Lashon Hara and compulsively said Tehillim. She always found the good and beauty in everyone and every situation, no matter the circumstances. She also loved my father unconditionally and understood him in ways that no one else did. She was obsessed with her children and her grandchildren and lived in constant awe and love for Hashem. Now I'd like to focus my speech on their Shloshim with a different angle, something I think both my parents would have preferred over just praising them. As a frum Jew, it's hard to just say things happen and we just move on with life. It is our responsibility to find the good and the lessons in everything that happens to us, no matter how difficult that may be. Otherwise, how can we dare say we believe in God? I struggled very much to find any good or lessons in our story, and after constantly challenging myself and reaching deep inside, I believe I found the bright message in our dark story. The first lesson is to show up for people. So many people from all over the world poured out their messages of care and love to our entire family. It was truly unbelievable, both in our personal and business circles. The outpouring of support was breathtaking. And then there's those people who just showed up. And I'm certain it wasn't easy for them to walk into our homes and call us again and again, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do, and not knowing how they can help. Yet so many of them kept coming back, here in Melbourne for our wives and our kids, and in Miami for us. As uncomfortable as it may have been for them, they showed up with a brave and caring face. My mother always told me that a person is most vulnerable when they're going through a simcha or a tragedy. They just don't want to feel alone. I can't possibly thank every person right now who is there for us, but there's one person that I want to single out. During a very dark and painful period, this person was a shining light, who's emotionally and mentally carried me through this entire period with such care, love, and empathy. I would not have survived this tally without you. I want to publicly thank you for being the wife and mother and friend that you are, and I love you. Every time I speak to your mother or grandmother, they like to remind me of how lucky I am to be married to Tali and how amazing you really are. We just celebrated our 14-year anniversary last week, but yet they both feel I still don't understand how lucky I am and how wonderful you are. But I think they don't understand how truly lucky I am and how truly beautiful you are. This message of showing up for people is something that this message of showing up for people is tied into the siyum that I'll be making shortly, which I'd like to summarize into the speech. Not long ago, I've learned an entire Masechta of Avos Reb Nosson, but never actually made a siyum for it. Avos Reb Nosson expands on Pirkei Avos and contains a wealth of halacha, stories, and historical facts. There's one story that stuck out for me of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, whose son tragically died, and his 5 top students came to be Menachem Avol and bring him comfort. The story goes as follows. Rabbi Lazar comes into his house and asks permission to speak in front of his Rebbe. When permission is granted, he said that, Rebbe, you should find comfort in the fact that Adam Rishon also lost his son, and there's a pasuk, which I won't quote, that talks about how he found comfort and he moved on with his life, and therefore you should find console in that, and you should move on with your life. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai looked at him and said, is it not enough that I'm suffering my own pain, but you have to remind me of Adam Rishon? Rabbi Yeshua comes along in the same sort of dialogue. He talks about Eov, who lost all his children on the same day. And there's a pasuk that shows how he comforted himself. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answered the same thing. I'm suffering enough as it is. You don't have to remind me of other people suffering. Rabbi Yossi comes along, talks about Aaron HaKohen's children. Rabbi Shimon comes along, talks about David HaMelech, who lost his son. And it goes on, exactly the same. Until finally, Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch comes along, and he sits down in front of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and asks for permission to speak. And he says, I want to give you an analogy of the situation that this situation is compared to. A king entrusts his servant with a treasure for safekeeping. And every day this man wakes up overcome with the joy and the awesome responsibility and privilege of guarding such a treasure for the king himself. Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, your son was a treasure, and you taught him Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Mishnah, Halacha, and Agadah, and so on. And now he left this world without any sin. You should be comforted with the knowledge that you have returned this treasure back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he entrusted you with, completely intact, the way it's meant to be. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai stood up and said, now I'm comforted, and this is how people should comfort others. My first lesson that I've learned out of our story is when someone's in need, just show up. The rest will look after itself. My second lesson is to live life like it's your last day on this earth. On Wednesday, June 24th, 2021, was the last day both my parents, Tzvi and Itty Ainsworth, were on this earth. On that day, my mother wasn't feeling very well, and my father went to the doctor and did some random errands. On that day, both my mother and father separately tried to call me, but I was too busy to take their phone calls. On that day, they would have gone about things like any other normal day because they both had no idea they wouldn't be here on Thursday. But what if they did? What if they knew that was the last day they'd be on this earth? What would they have done differently? What would they have said, instructed, spoke to, visited, called? There's so much to do on the last day of this earth. It's a massive idea to get your head around, and I think it's too much for any sane person to live with each day, but it's a reality that everyone has a last day on this earth. Except my parents and my siblings didn't get the opportunity to prepare for their last day. I'm challenging myself to wake up each day with the knowledge that this very well may be my last day on this earth. And how do I want to treat people? What do I want to achieve? How do I want to be remembered as a husband, a father, a friend, a business person, and most importantly as a Jew? It's a scary mindset, but it's also so powerful and something that I'm working towards daily. My second lesson is, what would you say and do right now if you knew, God forbid, you would not be here tomorrow? My third and final lesson is as follows. The bond between a parent and a child is impossible to articulate. Yet so many of us allow our own personal shortcomings and hang-ups to get in the way of this godly-like bond. I unfortunately did not have the very best relationship with my father, and while 7 weeks ago I was somewhat okay with that because of my own personal shortcomings, I have now lost that precious opportunity forever to change that. And there's many things I would like to have said directly to him and things that I wish he knew. Instead, I was forced to say these things while crying over his closed coffin. I was caught up with meaningless stuff, like how things were said or done, just stuff. And now they're all irrelevant, and all I have left is guilt and despair. While I lost the opportunity to properly honor my father and treat him with the respect he deserved, I tell everyone who listens, don't make the same mistake. The guilt and anguish that will come when it's too late to fix is not something I'd wish on anyone. My third lesson and final lesson is, don't let your own shortcomings get in the way of the precious relationships we are blessed with. Both my parents, Tzvi and Itty Ainsworth's lives ended together on June 24th, 2021. Abruptly and in tragedy. Nevertheless, we are still here. Their 7 children with our spouses and our many children who will live in their merit and memory. Now, can I ask everyone to please stand up for a Siyum and Kaddish? I'm just going to leave the last two Mishas, but Maishi can attest. I learned the whole thing. Kol Shema Shabara Kaddish Baruch Hu Elamei Loi Bara Elo Chvaydai Shnemar HaKol Shnika B'Shmil Chvaydai B'Rvasi V'Sartiv Afsha Azisum Omar Hashem Yimlech Lo'Elam Vod Amar Rabchin Bar Kasha Ratzah Kaddish Baruch Hu Zakas Shral Leficho Chol Harbas Torah Mitzvah Shnemar Hashem Chafetz L'man Tzidker Yavdor Torah V'Yader Yiskada v'yiskada shmei rabba Yamad v'chlusev yamich ma'chlusev Yasmach v'kari v'kari m'sheichei V'chayeched mechi v'chayechol v'yisrael Ba'agav v'znakari v'imru amen Yehei shmei rabba v'barach v'ma'yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisram v'yisnaseh V'yissadar v'yisaldeh v'yisallah shmei d'kut shabreichu V'elam kol v'chasav v'shvasa t'shulchas v'nechem asa Da'amiram v'yamav v'imru amen Ha'yisrael v'yaraban and al tamadein al kol tamadein samadein Ha'kol man d'sikin d'raisa T'lasam d'im chol v'asar v'asar Yehei lo'ayin koin shlo b'ravachina v'chisa rachmin L'chayin d'richin Zaynu d'richag V'kamad v'kamad d'shmaya B'imru amen Yehei shlo b'shmayim L'chayin toiv N'olim kol Yisrael B'imru amen Ha'yiseh shalom remo Hiyaseh shalom kol Yisrael B'imru amen. Now Mati.
Like many others, I would never have thought that I'd be standing here today, talking about my beloved Bobby, Itty, and Tzvi at their Shloshim. The past month has been unexplainable for all of us. To be on the way to footy training and to hear that my grandparents' building collapsed, only to be woken 12 days later to the news that both my beloved grandparents were found dead together, to watching both my grandparents being buried at once at 5 a.m. in the morning on our iPad, to not being able to be Menachem Ovel to my father and his siblings, to hearing my father say Kaddish for his parents, and to trying to accept this hard, challenging, dark, and almost cruel reality, to being here now thinking that my young father and all his siblings are now orphans, is all beyond imagination. Then I'm almost forced to come to the realization that both Bobby, Itty, and Tzvi, Oliver Shalom, will not be at my bar mitzvah, graduation, wedding, and other major life milestones. It feels as if the entire tragedy happened just like that. But the thing is, that is tragedy. It happens just like that with no warning and no preparation. To think that we're all sitting at the Shloshim of our beloved friends, mentors, relatives, parents, and grandparents, Tzvi and Itty Ainsworth, is a tragedy in itself. I often think to myself, what would I do or say 2 months ago if I knew that Bobby, Itty, and Tzvi would tragically die? Then I try to remind myself that it is not in my control what happens, when it happens, or whom it happens to, for it is Hashem's world, His words and actions that are in control. It is a Jewish custom to learn Mishnayos in the lead up to the Shloshim of a family member, in order to guide the neshama in his journey through Shemayim. I'd like to thank my chavrusa and neighbor Bachi Bro for learning Pirkei Avos with me in honor of my grandparents. There were two Mishnahs that particularly stood out to me in relation to Bobby, Itty, and Tzvi. The Mishnah I feel relates to Bobby, Itty goes as follows. Yeshua ben Parchaya said, appoint a teacher, a mentor for yourself, acquire a friend for yourself, and judge everyone favorably. My Bobby, Itty always knew how to connect to people by being a friend to absolutely everyone. She used to say, the one thing I'm good at is people. Her love for life and people came out constantly, whether she was talking to one of her countless best friends or a complete stranger. She judged everyone and everything with the same unconditional love and compassion. She always knew how to support other people, whether she was close to them or just borrowed their phone number. No matter the situation, good, bad, or awkward, she always knew what to say, how to say it, and what gift and emotional handwritten card would be most appropriate. Her optimism was what I felt she was best known for. Somehow she managed to see the good in everyone and everything, no matter what. To Bobby Itty, there was always happiness and good. These are all things I admire and will always remember her by. Now for the Mishnah I feel relates to Tzvi. It goes as follows. Shammai said, make a fixed time for Torah study, say little and do much, which I felt described my Zaidi best, and receive everyone with a cheerful face. My Zaidi was so kind and loving to my siblings, cousins, and I. He did whatever he possibly could to put a smile on our faces. whether with our mother's permission and sometimes without. I will always remember how he visibly enjoyed spending time with us no matter what. His quiet, humble, and to-do attitude to everything in life is something I admire and will strongly remember him by. I would like to thank everyone for your non-stop love, care, and support to my family in these challenging times. Bobby, Debbie, and Appa, you've both been incredible to our family. Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of Mati, Abi, Emmy, and Nathan Ainsworth, I'd like to take a special opportunity to publicly thank our mother, Tully Ainsworth. You have shown us so much patience, especially for me, non-stop love, endless care, and for some reason, never thought there was enough support for us. As your children, we cannot tell you enough how much we appreciate you. All we can say is that we really, really do appreciate everything you've done for all four of us in these challenging times. Now, Dad and Nussin, unfortunately, I was not able to attend the funeral shiva, so I'd like to take the opportunity to say, Hamakom Yenachem Esrem B'Torich Shar Avei Sion Rishalayim. May Hashem comfort you together with all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. May you only know simchas, nachas, and happiness from everything you do, and may we all see the speedy arrival of Mashiach now.
Hi, my name is Manny Ainsworth. My grandparents, Tzvi and Itty, were a huge part of my life. I never thought I'd be standing here at their Shloshim at the age of 12 and talking about some memories that I have of them. I remember the last time I spoke to them. It was Friday the 18th of June, 2021, in the morning at 5 a.m. when I was making sushi. The biggest memory that sits with me from that conversation is my grandmother telling me to put flowers on the sushi platters I make. But I kept on saying to her, I don't know what they do in America, but in Australia they eat sushi. Now look at it. Okay. And a very strong memory I have of my grandfather were his cookies. He had 2 cookies, one regular and one for special times. The regular cookie was for whenever I saw him or went out with him. And the special cookie, which was a big smiley face cookie from Hamisha, was for when he would take me for a haircut, birthday, or really anything he thought was special. Another memory of my grandfather is once I started wearing a small knit yarmulke. Whenever he would see me or a video of me, he would say, I can't see a yarmulke, you should get a big one. And every time I responded, first work on your sons, then work on your grandsons. That worked every time. And the memory of my grandparents is that everything anyone did was a huge achievement in their eyes. I thought this was something special about them. It also seemed like they had all the time in the world for everyone and anyone. They spoke to many people and always listened to everything they had to say. I'm really sad they will not be attending my bar mitzvah, which we hope to be in Israel. We were really excited for them to come and join us on that special occasion. It will definitely not be the same without them. For the last few weeks before they passed away, I would call them early Friday morning and speak to them, while everyone in the house was still asleep. It was a great time to speak to them, as my house was quiet. I really enjoyed those calls and looked forward to them. It makes me sad knowing I'll not be able to do that anymore. I really admired how my grandmother said so much to him, even with her busy phone schedule. She added Tehillim with her at all times. She was so dedicated to saying Tehillim as a part of her everyday life. I really admired how my grandfather, for his less talk, more do. And that phrase really summed him up. He didn't tell anyone really, but he did a lot behind the scenes. He also had a very tough exterior, but when it came to his kids or grandkids, that all went away. And he did all he could to make them happy, even if it meant buying me a present or treat that my mom didn't like. The memory that I have is when they lived in Melbourne, we used to have pizza and chips with them every Thursday night. I'll always remember my grandfather always wearing a suit and tucked in crisp white shirt, no matter the time or place, from pushing me on the swing at the park to coming to my school sports day and taking me to the beach. There he was, always in a suit and tucked in shirt. I remember when they came to Israel and they stayed with us. Special memory is when Zaidi took me to Mr. Chips and upgraded me from a small to an extra large. I'd like to thank my mother, Bubba and Zaida Suskin, for being there and helping us through this tough time. I'd like to finish off by saying that in my grandparents' honor, I'll donate 20% of the money made from the Bobby and Zaidi sushi platter that I will start making. The money will go to fibromyalgia cause and supporting future Israeli teens that go on search and rescue missions.
A lot of people tell me they wish they spent 7 days with us, so my speech is going to hopefully fill that time. Tonight's Shloshim is commemorating 30 days from the burial of both my parents, Tzvi and Itty Ainsworth of blessed memory. The past 30 days have been, in my mind, a series of events and memories that are simply too hard to accept. Tonight, I wish to share some of them with you. Thursday, 24 June, started as any other day. I was focused on what at that point in my life were big goals. I woke up, I weighed less than the day before, goal. I made a great coffee, not too hot, not too cold, another goal. And my kids got to school, which was the ultimate goal. At 11:38 a.m. our time, 9:38 p.m. Wednesday night in Miami, I spoke to my parents for 22 minutes. It was the ideal conversation, just me and them with no distractions. We covered all the good stuff. It was one of those calls that when you hang up, you say to yourself, that was just a great call. I should call them more often. That was the last time I spoke to my parents. Approximately 4 hours later, at 1:25 Miami time, the Champlain Towers South partially collapsed. My parents, along with 96 other people, lost their lives at that moment. About an hour and a half later, at 5:03, I got a call from my sister Chana, and she said, Nussin, Ma'antaz building collapsed. My initial reaction was simply a large sigh of confusion and shock. And then I asked her, what do you mean their building collapsed? It was as incomprehensible then as it is now. And that was the start of the most unbearable and tragic month of my life. The first thing I did was call Zalman and then my oldest brother Mendy to tell them. Zalman's reaction was similar to mine. He heard the words I said between my tears, but he simply did not understand what I was saying. Zalman came to my house and we were both in shock. I was frantically looking through Twitter feeds to find out any information. Once we saw an image of the wreckage, we knew we needed to go to Miami. From then until Saturday night, we focused and put all our resources on simply getting to Miami. We did not focus on the why. That was too hard. With the generous support of family, friends, and some special politicians, including Josh Feinberg and Josh Burns, Daniel Teller, Maishi Khan, we were able to get through Friday and Shabbos and get on the first flight after Shabbos. We arrived in Miami on Sunday evening. We went straight to my sister Chana's house. She lives a few short blocks away from the building. Later that night, Zalman, Davi, and I went to the site. We were stopped at police barricades. While we waited to be escorted to the family viewing spot, which was just 15 meters from the building, it started to torrential rain. I remember standing in the pouring rain, surrounded by police, emergency personnel, and barricades, looking at the building and thinking, I was just in my house in Melbourne on the phone to my parents, and now this. It was all very surreal. The next morning, my brother Mendy arrived from South Africa, and all my siblings were now together. Mendy, Davi, Shmuley, Zalman, me, Chana, and Levi. For the next week, our sister's house became a base camp. Looking back, the house became a place of real excitement that at any moment my parents were going to be found and walk through the door. And at the same time, it was a Shiva house. The only way we kids got through was by being together. We were a unit, leaning on and supporting each other. We went from 7 kids who were waiting, hoping, dreaming, laughing, reminiscing, and searching for our parents, to 7 orphans who were numb and lost. Our sense of identity was shattered. On Sunday, the 4th of July, most of us went to see the controlled demolition of the rest of the building. This finally happened at 10:30 p.m. We were standing in the street a few blocks away, and that sound and sight pierced through us. It was too much. The next morning on Monday, the 5th of July, at around 10:30, we were all sitting in my sister's lounge room. My brother got a call saying the police were on the way. A few moments later, 3 Miami-Dade detectives came into the house and gave us the news. They found our parents shortly after the controlled demolition. Even at that moment, there was a real sense of hope that the next words that were going to be that they were alive and on the way to the hospital. But that is not what they said. Telling my kids was difficult. How do you tell a child that both my parents, their grandparents, died? We collectively had to do that to over 25 grandkids. The rest of the day was spent trying to work through the process of arranging funerals. Early the next morning, on Tuesday, the 6th of July, all the kids flew with my parents' bodies to New York for their funeral with her Hatzalah ear division. We met the rest of the family in Crown Heights and went to the funeral home. Even now, I still have not processed what happened at the funeral home and at the cemetery that day. They brought my parents' coffins into a room with just us siblings. When I saw their coffins side by side, I felt so helpless and lost, and a large piece of me left my body. It was absolutely terrible. I could not stand or breathe. I watched as each of my siblings tore kriya and asked for forgiveness and said their goodbyes. While I was on the floor trying to catch my breath, all I remember thinking is, how did this happen and how could this happen? From there, we went past 770 and on to the cemetery. There were thousands of people there, but we felt alone. We watched as they buried our parents and as family, friends, and strangers shoveled the dirt to fill the grave. My parents are buried in the shadows of the Rebbe's aisle, and knowing how much this means to them brings some comfort. We hurried to the airport to make our way back to Miami, but we ended up getting delayed for 5 hours before that flight was canceled. Finally, the next afternoon, we all made our way back from New York to my brother Shmuel's house in Miami Beach to sit Shiva. The Shiva was filled with lots of minyanim, food, and many, many visitors, and lots that flew in even just for a few hours to be Menachem Avel. We had a special Shabbos Shiva with just us and Simon Jacobson. The day after Shiva, Zalman and I flew back to Australia. It was too soon to leave Miami, too soon to leave my siblings and the unit of support we had. But due to restrictions, it was either take that flight or risk not being able to get back for months. The next 2 weeks were spent in hotel quarantine in Sydney. I was able to spend that time with my big brother Zalman, and I'll cherish that time. And here we are tonight. The Masechta Talmud I learned for the Shloshim on Daf 32a records a discussion between Alexander of Macedon and the elders of the south. It goes through an exchange of questions. Alexander asked them, who is a wise man, who is a mighty man, and who is a wealthy man? To the last question they answered, a wealthy man is one who is happy with his lot. The Rosh comments on this, that this means one who is content and joyful with whatever has been decreed to him. To me, this discussion in the Gemara cuts straight through to the core virtues of living one's life. My parents had strong core values and beliefs, and to them, their children and grandchildren were their lot, and this made them very wealthy. To them, we were perfect, and they could not ask for anything more. Their love, support, and acceptance was magical. I want to talk about my parents, but sharing a single story will not capture them and would limit their legacy. Instead, I will share how I remember them and what will stay with me. My mother, she always wore rose-colored glasses and was, at least in her mind, a leading world-class expert on all things. Whenever we spoke about anything law-related, she would channel her inner Judge Itty of the Supreme Court, anything medical, and hello, Dr. Itty, who graduated from Harvard Medical School nonetheless. When the conversation turned to weather, she was Itty, the meteorologist. And if I ever spoke out about emotion, she would tell me her analysis as a psychologist, of course. My father, he was always there. He always had a perfect response, always sure of a way forward, and always confident. Always there to fill in the gaps. If he was there, and he was always there, everything was going to be okay. My mother was my ultimate friend and supporter. Take a drink. My mother was my ultimate friend and supporter. My father was my mentor. They were yin and yang, and together they made the perfect team. My mother was about affirmations. My father was action. My mother was a believer. My father was a doer. My mother believed in me and believed everything was going to work out. My father knew I could do it and made sure it did work out. My mother was the life of the party. My father made sure the party was arranged. My mother told me not to worry about the bris nappies, and my father was the one who changed them. My mother was a dreamer, and my father made her dreams come true. They were always so proud of anything we did. Nothing felt better than telling them about a good story, a success, or accomplishment we had. My mother told me a million times how proud she was of me and how much she loved me. My father just had this look, and I knew how proud he was and how much he loved me. Sure, in hindsight, he definitely could have said it a bit more. My parents had a deep belief in the power of Tehillim. Shabbos and Varchim was always a big deal to them. My father was always up early saying Tehillim. My mother would say Tehillim for hours. You would often find her in bed with an open Tehillim mumbling away. She encouraged many to say more Tehillim and gave many a Tehillim with the most heartwarming inscription on the inside cover. We want to honor their dedication to Tehillim and are going to launch the Tzvi and Itty Angels Tehillim Club here in Melbourne. This will start in a few days in time for Shabbos and Varchim Elul and will be headed by Menachem and Mary Lipsker. I will now conclude by learning the last Mishnah of Masechtas Talmud and then say Kaddish. The end of the Masechta captures my parents beautifully, remembering that Tehillim helped them through their life, and they have now been put to rest. The Masechta ends with a Mishnah which outlines the daily songs the Levium would recite in the Beis HaMikdash. Each one of those songs are part of the Tehillim. And the last line of the Masechta explains in what way the Shabbos song is for Shabbos. It says that the capital is a song for the future era, for a day that is entirely a Shabbos, a day of rest leading to everlasting life. Should I just read it? I was told to read a few more minutes. No? Yisgada, Yisgada, Shmei Rabba, V'yamad Yivru Chusei, V'yamad Chusei, V'yasam V'karni V'karni Mashiachei, V'chayechen and Vechen and Chayet Chol Beis Yisrael, V'agos Makar V'ramein, Yehei Shmei Rabba, V'arach V'mamaya, Yisbarach V'yishav, Yisbarach V'yishav Mishnasei, V'yisadav V'salav Shalosh, Medikut Shabrichu, Le'elo Mikol Brachasei V'shirasa, Shachas Nechmasa, Damir Goma V'ramein, Yisrael V'arabana V'altamidin V'alkol, Tamidin Tamidin V'alkol, Mandas G'varasei, Divasar, Adim V'div V'chol Asar V'asar, Yehei Lai Nechan Shavar B'china Chista Rachman, Nechayin Richin, Nezeni Richin, Nekadam Yikadam V'chud Nishmai V'mromein, Yehei Shalvar Rabba Min Shemai V'chaim Tev Malin V'alkol Yisrael V'mromein, Yisrael Shalom V'mromein, V'yaseh Shalom V'alkol Yisrael V'mromein.
Okay, now let's see him. The Torah. Is Eli Gutnick still here? Huh? Okay. We're now going to start a Sefer Torah in our parents' honor, which will hopefully be finished in time for Mati's bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
I guess that's it. The freshmen to the side, and it'll be Myron. Sorry? Yeah, everyone please come up there. That's it. That concludes the formalities for tonight. Everyone's invited to, we'll have Marv, yeah. And that's it.
We can do Marv next door.
Sure.
Everyone's invited to food on the side, and there'll be Marv in a few minutes. There'll be 2 minyan and Marv, yeah. And whoever wants to have a letter in the Torah is welcome to come up.
loading up all by himself. Thank you very much for coming, Mark. Thank you very much.
Sorry?
Josh, thank